Hello, welcome back to Sean Unboxing. Please like, subscribe, and share. Today, as you can tell by the title, we're going to be talking about this weekend's ESPN card, a heavyweight bonanza full of two of the top heavyweights in boxing today, and two exciting fighters who may be in line to potentially run up against one another if you think that potentially ESPN and Bob Arum are putting them in the same card together to help build up a potential matchup between the two. And that matchup, I think, would be potentially a fantastic fight. And the winner of that, I could easily see move into the top 10 of the heavyweight rankings. But let's get to it. Obviously, it's a busy week. We have a card from the UK and obviously this card from the US. So there's a lot to talk about this weekend. Obviously, no huge event like next weekend, but nonetheless, we still have boxing to discuss. So let's get to it. There we go. So let me just open up so we can get to it and you can see. So, sorry, the picture looks a little whacked out, but obviously this is Jared Big Baby Anderson, one of the most highly acclaimed young and up-and-coming American heavyweights in boxing today. He's a guy that people really think may be that next great American heavyweight. Obviously, people hoped that Deontay Wilder would become that heavyweight, even though initially people didn't really have too high expectations for Deontay Wilder. He ended up winning a world title, and then, of course, bandwagon jumpers and people started to think, well, he's got the power. He's got the height and the reach. Maybe he can become that next great American heavyweight. He showed glimpses, but he never really showed the desire in training and developing his style to really become what people were hoping that he would become. Whereas Jared Big Baby Anderson, unlike Wilder, started his amateur career much younger, has a lot more obviously development technically, unlike Wilder, who did start boxing pretty late, I think at 18 or 19 years of age, whereas Jared Anderson was doing it as a young boy and obviously has been in the gym since then. Now he's started to propel his heavyweight career, had some very solid wins on his resume, and is really just a fight or two from becoming one of the top names in heavyweight boxing. And being an American, he is exactly what many American YouTubers would love, right? Somebody to represent their country. And he's got the length, the physicality, the speed, the power. Obviously, he hangs out with all those young up-and-coming ESPN fighters like Abdullah Mason, Shakur Stevenson, and many others. And hanging around this group, you can really see how this would charge these guys up, thinking that they're going to be that generation to take over boxing. And many people feel potentially that is exactly what's going to happen. So here is the card. So there's a few names that we know. There's no big, huge names, but there's a lot of established names. Obviously, Jared Anderson is fighting Riyad Mahrez, a quality opponent, not an opponent that a lot of casual fans would be familiar with, but hardcore fans know that this is a good opponent, not a great opponent, but a kind of guy that could give him some rounds, a guy that comes in shape himself, and a guy that might look at this as the perfect opportunity to really catapult himself right into the conversation. Then, of course, you have Efe Ajagba, who's been in the conversation a little bit longer than Jared Anderson. Obviously, he's a little older. He's already been at high levels in his career, lost some, won some. And this opponent he's facing, Guido Vello, he is another young ESPN heavyweight, a guy that was being brought up along with Jared Anderson. But in his biggest step-up fight, he was stopped. And so since then, obviously, he's trying to redevelop his career, put himself back in contention, and show that, he's got some upside. Stepping in with Efe Ajagba, this is a real test for him. Ajagba's taller, longer, punches harder, is more experienced, has a better chin. If you look at it just as far as the checklist, there's no way you would think that Guido Vinello could beat Effie Ajagba. And in my prediction, I definitely did not pick Guido Vinella to beat Effie Ajagba. But if he does, that's exactly what he needs. A big name, quality opponent that people really think is a test. Some people were once talking about Effie Ajagba as a poor man's version of Deontay Wilder, right? A lot of similarities to Wilder. Technically not the best fighter, but tall, long, with very good power, just like Deontay Wilder. So it'll be interesting to see how these two fights unfold. Obviously, we expect that ESPN is hoping that Ajagba and Anderson win, and then maybe later this summer we will get to see Anderson and Ajagba in what would be a really, really, really exciting matchup. You also have a little more experienced fighters like Ruben Villa, and of course Robson Kansekow, two fighters who've been in world title contention already in their career, both seen as quality fighters. They may not be that level to actually break into world title championship levels, but they're the kind of opponents that are going to consistently be in the top 10 and putting themselves into contention for possible world title fights. Excuse me. And you know that if you're a young guy coming up and you want to put yourself right there and get yourself a world title fight, these are the kind of guys you need to beat. You beat a Ruben Villa at 126 pounds, 130 pounds, and probably in your next fight, you're going to be fighting for a world title. If you beat Robertson Kansekow in a similar situation, a similar result is going to happen, whether that's at 130 or 135, wherever he's going to be fighting at this point of his career. So, well, it's not the most stellar card out there. It's quality. You also have quite a bit of up-and-coming youth. Abdullah Mason is seen as one of the best young prospects in world boxing, a guy that many people compare very favorably to Bud Crawford and also to Boots Ennis, and see him as a potential pound-for-pound champion for many years to come. And at being 19, 20 years old, he's got a long, long career ahead of him. And then there's a couple, younger fighters we'll talk about as well, who obviously just signed with Top Rank ESPN. We know Top Rank does a great job signing and developing young amateur fighters and getting them right into that contention, whether contenders or champions. Obviously, not everyone is going to be able to become a world champion. There's a lot of different levels you need to go through to get there. But in the process, Top Rank does it better than anyone. So let's move forward and see what else we got going. So here is Riyad Mary. Sorry if I'm butchering his name. 32-2, only stopped once in his career. 26 knockouts. So obviously, like Anderson, he comes in with a lot of power. He's a tough guy who's been in with a lot of fights, has a lot of experience. You can see this ranking beside you. This is the top 26 to top 45 heavyweights right now. And well, a lot of these names are not world-class names or names that are a household name. There's a lot of quality. And well, many of these fighters will just become perennial contenders, the type of guys you need to beat to move forward. There's also a lot of potentially exciting matchups in and amongst these fighters. When you think of guys like Dempsey McKean, obviously Robert Helenius, Tom Schwartz, Charles Martin, right? Cassius Chaney, Tony Yoka, Carlos Takam, Simon Keane, Jermaine Franklin, Sergey Zumin. These are guys who've already been through it. They've got experience. They're that level of opponent that you really do need to beat if you want to be one of the top guys in heavyweight boxing. Then, of course, you have the potential fighters. Tony Yoka was that. He was a gold medal Olympian. He's really sort of fallen off the cliff, losing a few fights in a row, just showing that, lack of development, lack of a solid team around him. He just hasn't really developed into the kind of fighter that people were hoping. Then you have, of course, the Kazakhstani fighter, Kosta Buyutsky, who was in a very good fight recently. which he ended up losing. But it was a fantastic fight. If he can learn from that and come back better, all the more for him. We've seen many of these fighters who, in similar situations to him, like a Sergey Zuman and others, when they had that upset, they were never able to really learn from it and become better. They basically sort of stayed at that level or took a little step backwards and right, sort of found their plateau. For him, we'll see what he's able to do moving forward. Yevgeny Chichenko was a similar fighter, right? Had a world title fight, I think, at cruiserweight, ended up losing in a very exciting fight. And he's still young, so we're waiting to see if he can learn from that and get better, or if he's going to sort of plateau at the current level. And then, of course, you have probably the most highly regarded fighter out of this list of fighters, and that is Bakar Jalilov, who is a gold medal Olympian, a gold medal European champion, and has all the attributes to be one of the best in boxing. But you need to stay busy. You need to fight quality opponents like the guys listed here. And if you're successful and dominant against them, then you will continue to move forward in the rankings and your name will continue to become relevant. For me, I think he needs to work on his offhand, and he also needs to become a little bit more of a body puncher, which he isn't. Excuse me. Right now, he relies too much on his jab and his backhand. Just a consistent 1-2. And while that may do well against limited opposition, what's going to happen when you face elite fighters? They're going to be able to take those punches away. They're going to make you dig deeper. And I don't know if he's got that in his toolbox, but we'll find out eventually. Efe Ajagba and his opponent, Guido Velinelli, 12-1-1, 10 knockouts, hard-punching Italian, a guy that you could see ESPN was really excited about. He had the looks. If you could market him and he could become successful, the new Marciano, right? But obviously he had a draw early on in his career and then a knockout loss. So he's had 2 fights since then building up, but not against high-level opponents, just against build your confidence back, get back to where you were type of guys. Now he's stepping in with this monster, Efe Ajagba. And I don't know if he goes 8 rounds with Ajagba, in truth, but it'll be an interesting fight as long as it lasts. Here is the top 11 to 25, and you can see the consistent progression of improvement and just a higher level of fighter. Chile Zhang, Joyce, Pulev, Gassiev, Hunter, Hrgovic, Bokoli, Chisora, Sanchez, Ajagba, Anderson, Miller, Makhmudov, young Australian fighter Justis Huni, and South African Kevin Learna. All these fighters are quality, and you could throw any of these fighters in with one another, and you're going to get a very intriguing fight, depending on the particular matchup. Obviously, we saw Zhang beat Joyce twice. Zhang just lost to Parker in a recent fight. Pulev was one of the most highly regarded heavyweights for an extended period of time. Obviously, he's a little older now. Guys like Hunter was right there, but he walked away from big opportunities. Gassiev, inactivity, injuries sort of threw him off. Sanchez, nobody wants to fight him. Hrgovic, a long period of time, nobody wanted to fight him, right? And then Makhmudov was just exposed. Justis Huni was kind of exposed in his last fight, as was Kevin Learna. So, this is a list where a guy like Jared Anderson could easily move forward and eventually surpass the fighters in front of him here. And he has every reason to be able to do that. He's younger and he has a lot of physical gifts many of these fighters don't have. I think probably the toughest fighter standing in his way on this list would be Frank Sanchez. And a lot of that is stylistically, he's the kind of fighter nobody really wants to get in the ring with. Then, of course, we have our top 10. I don't know how Wildin's on this list, especially after he just got his ass knocked the fuck out by Anthony Joshua. But it's good that Ajagba has catapulted up. This was his second big win. He beat Chisora a few years ago, and after that win, kind of became inactive, fighting low-level opponents and not really getting the kind of fights that people were hoping to see him in, to see if he really was that great of a fighter. And then the way he destroyed Makhmudov, now obviously he jumped back into this list, as well as Daniel Dubois. I don't know how Luis Ortiz is still here, because he hasn't done anything of note in a while. Obviously, Dillian White just got knocked out by Fury and had drug suspensions. Otto Wallen just got knocked out. Wilder got knocked out twice in a row, ended up beating his sparring partner, and then just got outboxed by Parker. So, there's a lot of room in this list for young, up-and-coming guys from the list I mentioned below to jump in and push these fighters down. Easily from 7, 8, 9, and 10. These guys could easily be pushed off this list, and justifiably they should be, right? When you talk about Dubois, Caballal, Parker, Fury, AJ, and Usyk, those guys deserve to be there. But there's a few other guys that potentially should be there as well. But you got to fight the fights. You got to earn your position. And that's always what it comes down to. Here are the two fighters I mentioned, the two experienced guys. Consecao, 17-2-1, 8 KOs. This is a guy who's been in with every top level fighter at 130 in his case, and has surprised people. People felt he got robbed against Valdez. A quality fighter, an Olympian, right? And that shows. But then at the same time with him, like many fighters who never are able to crack that glass ceiling, he slows down in the second half of fights. He's unable to keep his activity at the level he needs to win those fights. And obviously that becomes his kryptonite. Good, tough fighter, never been knocked out, even though he's faced legitimate elite competition. Ruben Villa, similar, 21-1, 7 KOs. One of the drawbacks for both of these fighters is they don't really have that power to really make a statement in fighting their opponents, to really threaten or make their opponents afraid of what's coming back. Ruben Villa is the same. Obviously, he's never been knocked out. He's got a couple quality wins on his resume as well. He beat Lopez, who's now 126-pound world champion. So he's beat world champions. So depending on what opportunities arise for him, he may be able to break that glass ceiling, just like Robertson, Consecao. But when you run into guys like Shakur Stevenson, it's going to be a long night, man. There's just nothing you can do. And then when you beat a guy like Valdez, but you don't get the respect you deserve, then, it's unfortunate you're just not the A side in that particular situation. Speaking of young superstars, Abdullah Mason, 12-0, 10 KOs. He's still only fighting 8 rounders, so Top Rank is still moving him very slowly against limited opposition in short fights, not trying to stress him too much, not putting him in with hard punchers or really high quality fighters, not putting him in 10 or 12 rounders where, potentially fatigue, lack of experience, and youth may play against him. But so far, so good. He's looked incredible. He has the perfect body type to move through multiple divisions. Right now, he's a lightweight. If he can get moving quicker and put himself in position to fight for a world title soon, he could potentially become a lightweight, a junior lightweight, a junior welterweight, a welterweight, even a junior middleweight, and depending on how his body fills out, possibly even a middleweight. There's a real possibility Abdullah Mason could become a 5-weight world champion down the line. Obviously, that's a big projection, right? But based on his skill set at such a young age, you can see how that is a possibility. But we also see young guys who get too much fame too early, basically throw away their careers with lack of professionalism, and they just never live up to expectations. So I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I'm saying, you never know how a person's career is going to unfold until, it's actually unfolded. That's why we don't stamp people like Abdullah Mason, Hall of Famers, and multiple weight world champions, or pound for pound, even though some people on YouTube have put them on pound for pound lists. But the reality is you got to fight the fights. And only after that can you really get the credit and be put on these type of lists and mentioned with other great fighters. Here is the first young fighter that just signed with Top Rank, Ali Feliz. I'm not familiar with Ali Feliz. I watch some amateur boxing, the Worlds, and obviously the Olympics. A lot of American only tournaments I don't watch. They're not shown on YouTube, so I don't have access to those. At least I haven't seen any. Whereas obviously the World Games and the Olympics, you can see those fights. You have far more access to them. And I don't know if he's been part of Team USA, involved in those kind of international tournaments, but obviously he was part of Team USA, and now he's making his professional debut. He's pretty young. I think he was 18 years old. If I might be wrong, I can't remember off the top of my head, but you can go check him out. There's a whole bio on him, goes into it. Just check his name out and you can look at his whole breakdown as far as his contributions and involvement with Team USA. And that's not a surprise. We know that Top Rank really uses the Team USA as a feeder sort of pool for their young prospects. They consistently sign tons and tons of high-level amateur fighters, whether they're from the States or worldwide. Another one who is well recognized from El Paso, Texas, I think, Julian Delgado. Julian had just won his national Golden Gloves title, Corpus Christi, and obviously, was getting a lot of attention as a up and coming amateur fighter, and now obviously just signed his first contract to become a professional, and this is going to be his first fight on Top Rank ESPN as well. So it'll be exciting to see these young fighters make their debut, see what kind of potential they have, see if they're on the level of, say, a guy like Nico Ali Walsh, who, don't get me wrong, I see a lot of good things about him. He's got some natural power. Obviously, he's tough, but he's also lacking some things. He's not the fastest fighter. Obviously, he doesn't have a lot of amateur pedigree, so technically he's got some negatives. He also defensively isn't great. He tends to get hit too much. But, you got to take the good with the bad when fighters are young. Then you look at guys like Camille Moten or Abdullah Mason, and these kids, they look real sharp for such young fighters. Really slick. And what's the word I'm looking for? Polished. They look very polished, right? So when you watch them in the ring, it's definitely levels compared to the fighters they're in with, who are just, they are what they are, right? The majority of them are cans. But you got to go through those fighters and get your professional experience, get guys hitting you low, grabbing you, hitting you, headbutting you, and just get you familiar with what the pro game is like. And so you're going to rather put them in with those level of opponents than really seasoned high-level guys early on. My Canadian brethren, Eric Bazinian, is also fighting this weekend. If you pay attention to the 168-pound division, obviously Diego Pacheco just fought last weekend, and I was talking about how deep this division is, very similar to the 140-pound division. And one of the top young up-and-coming fighters is Eric Bazinian, 32-0, 23 knockouts. They were talking about who Pacheco may face next, and they talked about Eric Bazinian and a few other fighters who may be that next opponent for Diego Pacheco. And it's good to see that Bazinian and Pacheco are basically on the same fight schedule, right? One fought last weekend, one's fighting this weekend. We know that Bazinian is part of that Canadian promotional company. I can't remember what the name of it is. So him linking up with a major American promoter, it shouldn't really be a problem, because as a Canadian promoter, you're always going to eventually be working with one of the major American promoters once your fighters get to a certain level, because otherwise you're never going to be part of the big show. You're sort of a feeder promoter, right? And that's obviously what he is. So for Bazinian, him against Pacheco would be a really good fight. Two undefeated fighters. Both have good power, but they're both needing to continue to up their level of opponents and see what they do once they do that. Some other fighters who've been mentioned with Diego Pacheco are guys like, speaking of Diego Pacheco, there he is, 21-0, 17 KOs. Obviously, coming off of last week's victory, he did not look polished or great, but we know that opponents mean a lot. Shakur looked unbelievable against the Japanese fighter. Looked unbelievable, Roy Jones-esque. And then he faces De Los Santos, and all of a sudden we get a completely different version, and you can find all kinds of reasons to criticize and hate on him. For Pacheco, it was similar. In previous fights, he's looked dominant, but in the fight this past week, he looked that he had some shortcomings he definitely needs to improve on. So guys like Eric Bazinian, or a guy that just got in it with him on social media, Edgar Berlanga, right? Mexico, Puerto Rico, that's always a great matchup. Obviously, Berlanga is a guy that people are talking about potentially getting a Canelo Alvarez fight. But I think, fuck, man, you better beat a guy like Diego Pacheco or Christian Mbilla before you start calling out Canelo Alvarez. Because at this point, nobody's impressed by you. Nobody's thinking you really have any legitimacy in fighting a Canelo Alvarez for undisputed world titles. You need to beat some of the quality guys in and around your weight division, right? And that's the same thing we say about every division, whether it's 154, whether it's 140 pounds or 135 or any other weight class. Pacheco, obviously, Bedzinian, Berlanga, Christian Mbilla, all four undefeated fighters at 168 pounds. Obviously, all of them have power. You see Mbilla, he is a monster of a fighter, cracks the body, comes at you like a rhinoceros, 26-0, 22 KOs. Obviously, French fighter, an Olympian, but a guy that is just starting to break out now, and his name is just starting to resonate. Bazinian, still kind of unknown. Pacheco, well, he's with a major promoter, only based on his misperformance this weekend does he seem to be getting more recognition through social media. And obviously a lot of that's because Berlanga was calling him out and saying that, yeah, come on, I'll fight you, I'll knock your ass out. And of course, Pacheco had previously said something similar about Berlanga. So that would be a great fight. Here is something I just saw on Twitter or X today. They were talking about prime Lomachenko facing these fighters: Barrera, Morales, Pacquiao, what's the Cuban's name? Obviously Marquez, Prince Hassim, and Corrales. And who's that Cuban guy? Man, I know his name. Very good fighter. His name escapes me, but you can leave in the comment section below. But they were asking, how do you think Lomachenko would do against these guys? Well, you would have to think about 130 pounds when Lomachenko was making fighter after fighter after fighter after fighter after fighter, no mas. Guys like Nicholas Walters, an undefeated world champion who destroyed Nonito Donaire like nobody has ever. Of course, until Anui just destroyed a much older version of Walters, Donaire recently. Up until that point, Walters looked like he was probably the best fighter from 126 to 130. And then, of course, beat Rigo, who people had on their pound-for-pound list. At one time, people were asking who was better, Rigo or Floyd Mayweather. I don't know who the fuck was saying that, but people were saying that. It's not me capping. It's true. And if you were around, you remember what I said. I never said that because obviously I don't know how you can compare Rigo to to Floyd Mayweather. I mean, one guy, he's just got a short career that doesn't show nearly as much as Floyd Mayweather. So, it's a little premature to try to compare him to a guy that has so much more under his umbrella. But let's just take a quick peek right now. Rankings. I wonder if Lomachenko is going to be ranked at 130 for let's just look. I'm just curious. So 130 pounds. Are they going to rank guys lower? Well, maybe. They got Alexis Arguello, number 1. So they're going to miss those guys at like the lower weight division, featherweight. I mean, I think Lomachenko at featherweight was still a dominant fighter. We saw him beat, obviously, Gary Russell. People are going to say, well, he lost to Salido. Well, that's true. He lost to Salido, but that was obviously his second professional fight. Salido hit him low and he lost a split decision and still almost knocked Salido out in the 12th round. So obviously you're going to learn and be experienced. Nobody's saying that prime Lomachenko was a fighter with 2 fights on his resume. We're talking about a prime Lomachenko. So like around 10 and 12 and 0 or 12 and 1 or 10 and 0. Okay, so here's Prince Nassim, ranked at 122 pounds. They mark him at 16th. 16th. Juan Manuel Marquez is number 4. Obviously, we saw Barrera schooled and put a beating on Prince Nassim, which I predicted. When that fight was first predicted, I was like, man, this guy's going to get an ass beating. And to be fair, you look at guys like Barrera. He was a great up-and-coming Mexican fighter until he stepped in with a slick American fighter and was exposed, and then had to retailor his style of fighting, and then came back a much different fighter, a better all-around fighter. Morales was similar, right? A guy that was destroying people, and not until he really started fighting elite fighters did he have to adapt and adjust, because obviously he started losing to guys that were giving you tough fights. Pacquiao was the same. He took a couple of losses early, but a lot of that had to do with more being starving to make weight, making weight classes where he was too small, and then obviously not being 100% in the ring, getting knocked out to the body in several fights. Not until obviously he stepped up and fought Barrera and then lost to Morales, right? And realized that he needed to have a right hand. And then at that point, he started to develop a much better right hand, which obviously served him very well moving forward. Corrales was a very one-dimensional fighter. While he was able to weight bully smaller fighters, he was very successful, right? But, when he fought fighters that were technically better than him, skilled fighters, he was destroyed, embarrassed, right, by a Floyd Mayweather. Nassim Hamed, obviously, first fight in America against a quality fighter, almost was exposed, ended up pulling it out because of his unbelievable power. But then once he stepped in to face a legend like a Barrera, he got destroyed. Marquez, obviously, he lost to an Indonesian, world champion early on in his career, had a few tough fights, had some fights with guys like Kitsidis and other fighters that were good opponents, but nobody thought those fights should have been nearly as competitive as they were. And then, of course, the Cuban fighter who, like Rigo, obviously came to the States older after a long career as an amateur in Cuba, had a good career in the States, right? But, was never like one of the best fighters in his division. I mean, he was one of the best, but he was never the best fighter in his division. Let's just look at Marquez as an example, since he's probably, out of this list, probably outside of Pacquiao, he's probably number 2. It'd probably be Pacquiao, Marquez, Barrera, Morales, Nassim, the Cuban, and then Corrales is probably last on the list. So Marquez, right, lost to Freddie Norwood in 1999, right? You faced a slick fighter who had speed and better technique the first time you faced a guy like that, and what happened? You ended up losing, right? And then you faced a lot of good fighters, but there's nobody on the list out after Freddie. Robbie Pendon was good. Manuel Medina, solid. Then he faced Derek Gainer, but Derek Gainer at this point already had 5 losses. Then he faced Pacquiao, had a draw in a fight where he should have lost, but because of the scoring error, he got the draw. Fought Salido, which was a quality fight, beat Salido. Then lost to Chris John, a boxer, a guy that was a slick technical fighter. So you can see what his kryptonite is. He did well against Pacquiao because Pacquiao was so aggressive, it gave him opportunities to be a counterpuncher. Then he lost to Floyd Mayweather, another slick fighter. lost to Pacquiao, which was controversial, lost to Tim Bradley, a slick fighter, right? Not hard punchers, right? But slick, good technical fighters. So based on that, you got to assume that a Lomachenko would beat Marquez, right? Because he's a better technical fighter, better feet, better angles, right? He's got faster hands. He's just a better all-around fighter to Juan Manuel Marquez. And this is nothing against Marquez. Marquez is a Hall of Famer and a legend. But when we're trying to compare stylistic matchups, you got to look at what a guy's done against certain fighters and then see, well, how would Lomachenko do? We saw Lomachenko against elite fighters like Russell, Walters, Rigo, and he embarrassed Walters and Rigo. Obviously, the fight with him and Gary Russell was competitive, but that was also his third professional fight, right? Well, you're a great amateur, only having two world title fights before you, you still have a lot to learn as a professional, right? Even though you're 25 years old at that time. Then let's go on his list. Who else? Oh, Joel Casamayor. That's Casamayor, right? Yeah. He beat Casamayor. Oh, yeah. Okay. Casamayor, who ended up 38-6, only stopped twice, 22 knockouts. Very good fighter, Casamayor. When we go through his early career and look at what he did, he lost to Elcito Freitas, who was undefeated and a quality fighter. And that's no bad loss. I mean, that was a great fight when it was signed. People are like, man, who's going to win this? This is quality. Cuba versus Mexico. Was Freitas Mexican? No, I don't think so. Then he faced Corrales, lost to Corrales by split decision, right? I know I said he's above Corrales. Okay, so maybe Corrales is a little above him, a little, split decision. Then he faced Castillo, lost to him by split decision, right? Then ended up facing Juan Manuel Marquez, got knocked out in the 11th round, and then faced Tim Bradley, got knocked out in the 8th round. So I think that tells you what you need to know. If I think Lomachenko would beat Marquez because of how Marquez struggled with technical fighters, and this guy was a technical fighter as well, obviously from the Cuban school, I think Lomachenko would beat him as well. Maybe not in the same fashion he beat Rigo, but, maybe some similarities. Marco Antonio Barrera. And he was one of my favorite fighters. I love Barrera. When he had his first loss, I was gutted, but I was happy to see he came back a better fighter. So, yes, he faced, obviously, Kennedy McKinney, an Olympian, did very well against him, stopping him in 12 rounds in a great fight. Then he faced Junior Jones. Long, snappy jab, fast hands, technical fighter, a little bit of pop on his punches, and ended up losing back. Well, he had a disqualification the first fight, then lost the second fight to him. Then faced Morales, split decision, lost to Morales. Then lost to Pacquiao, beat Kevin Kelly, quality fight, beat Morales in the rematch, beat Nassim Hamed, beat Morales again by majority decision, beat Joaquin Juarez again, lost to Marquez, lost to Pacquiao, lost to Amir Khan, obviously at a much bigger weight and much later in his career. Prince Nassim Hamed, 36-1, his only loss coming to Barrera. But, he had a near-death life experience when he fought Kevin Kelly, right, who was 47-1-2. Kevin Kelly knocked his ass down multiple times, 3 times, before Kevin Kelly got knocked out in the 4th round. Went the distance with Wayne McCullough. Wayne McCullough is good, but he's no fucking Lomachenko, and then, of course, was destroyed by Barrera. I know it was a 12-round decision, but that was a masterclass performance for Barrera. He really looked great against him. So, when push comes to shove, I have to think that he would beat Barrera, Morales, but I think Morales would give him a tougher fight than Barrera. Beats Corrales, beats Hassim Hamed, beats Marquez, but obviously, that could be a fucking great fight. Who knows how it turned out? Marquez is a great fighter, a true warrior, and beats obviously Casamayor. Then you have Pacquiao left. I love Pacquiao. I love Lomachenko. So now, you get me in a position where I need to pick between my two children and determine who I love more. It's tough. Obviously, Pacquiao is a way faster, more explosive, uh, harder puncher than Lomachenko. Lomachenko, though, is way better technically than Pacquiao. There's no comparison, right? Pacquiao was an athletic fighter. He wasn't a technically brilliant fighter. Um, so when I think about this fight, I think that Lomachenko would win rounds against Pacquiao, but early Pacquiao, with his volume, his aggressiveness, the unorthodox shots he was throwing, and just the speed and power, I think it could be similar to Teofimo Lopez in some ways, right? The way that Lomachenko was a little shell shocked and hesitant because of the speed and power. And I could see that maybe that would have some sort of effect on Lomachenko against Pacquiao as well. So I could see Pacquiao winning that fight by a close margin over 12 rounds. And I think he edges out a victory, kind of like Lopez did against Pacquiao, against Lomachenko. Obviously, Pacquiao is not, we're talking prime. So we're talking Pacquiao 122, 126, Lomachenko 122, 126. So we're not talking about much bigger sort of. Lopez was physically bigger than Lomachenko. But I think with Pacquiao, it's still that explosiveness, right? The threat, the fast hands, the movement, the awkward punches, and just the speed and aggressiveness and the high volume of punches that he would throw. But nonetheless, it's a intriguing matchup. So out of these 7 fighters, I think Pacquiao beats him by close fight, and I think he beats the other 5. Some people will disagree because they just hate on Lomachenko and they will try to justify things based on whatever reason they try to base it on. But I'm thinking about these fighters facing fighters that have some similarities to Lomachenko and how they struggled or lost to fighters like him. People would say, well, these guys are like Salido. Well, to be truthful, none of these guys are like Salido, right? These guys are not like Salido. Salido is a rough and tumble type of fighter who came in 20 pounds heavier than Lomachenko in that fight, hit him low a million times, and he had a ref that didn't take any points, no deductions or anything against him. And that was obviously a very young version of Lomachenko. We're talking prime Lomachenko, right? After he lost, with the experience you garner from losing and then facing a fast, highly regarded top young fighter of the year in Gary Russell. So I'm thinking of Lomachenko at 130 when he was destroying guys like Rigo, uh, Walters, Sosa, and making guys quit back to back to back to back, embarrassing guys. And that's the version of Lomachenko I'm thinking about. And all these fighters were really at their best, around that weight as well, 122 to 130, in and around that weight class. You can argue about which weight they were at their best at, and there might be some truth to that. But yeah, that's just the way I see it. Obviously, people may have a different opinion, and that's fine. Everybody can have an opinion. I just saw this on X and I thought, oh, okay, that's an intriguing fight. It's interesting that whoever made this didn't put any top Black American fighters from those weight divisions at or on this, but I didn't make it. I'm only commenting and referring to it. So don't hold that against me. It is what it is. But thanks everyone for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, and share. I will see you next time. Peace out and enjoy. Where am I? Solo layout. Remove from stage. This is the one thing when I'm looking at this, how I can stop it from here, from my things. Okay, there we go. So, peace out. I will see you next time. Remember to like, subscribe, and share. And whoever's cloning channels and coming on pretending to be other people, dude, I'm just going to block everyone that I think is a clone. Everybody.